Hi, everyone. I hope that you are doing well. Welcome to week 6 of the course. I can't believe that we're here, but here we are. This week, we are focusing on another theory of motivation that's kind of a part 1 of 2. This theoretical perspective, or this week, we're focusing on a theory of motivation that for the first time, sort of, encompasses constructs that both fall into or both reflect the can I do this and why do I want to? Both questions that we've used to guide our understanding of motivation. And specifically this week, we're focusing on situated expectancy value theory. So without further ado, let me dive in and give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to discuss in this recording. And also, of course, now that I'm about to say this, it's going to be the opposite, but fun fact that I've already done this recording and somehow it got messed up. So this is my second time. So hopefully what that will mean for all of you is that it's extra polished and clear. However, of course, now that I've said that, it's probably not going to be the case. So I apologize, but great. I'm excited for the opportunity to share this recording with you for a second time. Anyway, I'll stop talking. Getting back to the overview, what you'll find is that situated expectancy value theory is probably, I think what you'll find is it's incredibly valuable, but also there's a lot of complexity embedded within this theoretical perspective. So I'm going to spend a decent amount of time unpacking some key tenets of this theory and what I encourage you to kind of pay attention to in order to develop kind of an initial understanding of this theoretical perspective. And then, given that all of you will have read Beamer and colleagues this week, I am going to spend some time going over some just key summary points and then a few things that I encourage you to pay attention to or take away from the article. So without any more delays, let's dive into what is situated expectancy value and just an overview of the theory. As I mentioned earlier, something that is important and helpful to keep in mind about this theory is that embedded within it are constructs that map onto those two overarching questions that we've talked about in terms of framing motivation. The can I do this question and the why do I want to? And not only why do I want to, but also why might I not want to engage in a given academic task? So again, put in another way, what you'll find about situated expectancy value theory is that there are beliefs embedded within this theoretical perspective that map onto students' competence beliefs and also for their reasons for engaging in a given way or not engaging in a given way in an academic domain or task or whatever it is that is the focus of exploration. So here is a visual depiction of the theoretical model. I was actually just saying to somebody earlier today that I've been really lucky to have an opportunity to collaborate with some colleagues in physics education. And I showed them this model and they immediately nicknamed it the game board model because of just how incredibly complex and confusing, like kind of like a complicated game board or board game, I guess. And so with that being said, there's obviously a lot of complexity within this model, and it is antithetical to my goal for all of you to have kind of a perfect and detailed understanding of all of the different intricacies of this model moving out of this course. In fact, I don't even know if I could recite or explain all of these individual kind of characteristics or components of the model from memory, because that's not the point. So instead, I'm going to direct your attention to a few kind of key bottom lines and tenets that I want you to pay attention to with regard to what this theory proposes about motivation. So first, let's start with the very left side of this model. What the very left side of this model emphasizes is something that we've already talked quite a bit about in this course, which is that the cultural and other kind of contextual aspects of an individual's environment really, really matter for the motivational beliefs that a student ultimately develops in a given domain. Another thing that really matters are the socializers that students are, or that individuals in general are interacting with. Socializers could, a few examples of what socializers reflect or who they are could be teachers, of course, parents or guardians, peers, are just a few examples of who socializers are. The other things kind of in this left side of the column that really matter are the individual characteristics and previous experiences that students bring to the table. So the bottom line here to kind of take away from this very left side of the model is these contextual considerations really, really matter, both in terms of what is reflected in the students' environment that they're surrounded by, what's reflected and what's reinforced by socializers within that environment, and then also what the individual student brings to the table. As we move through the model, what I want to emphasize here about the second so-called column of the model is that it's not just the experiences and the contextual considerations that matter. It's also students' perceptions and interpretations of those experiences. And when I say that they matter, what I mean is that they're really powerful antecedents or predictors of the motivational beliefs that ultimately develop, and then also how students end up performing and behaving as a result of those motivational beliefs. So bottom line here from the second column is that it's not so that these contextual experiences and considerations really matter, but another thing that really makes them matter is not just the experiences on their own, but also students' perceptions and interpretations of those experiences. According to situated expectancy value, or I may refer to the acronym SEVT throughout this recording as well, these interpretations are important predictors of the goals that students develop and also their effective reactions to the interpretations and perceptions. And we've already seen the importance of goals and discussed the importance of goals and emotions within this course. So for example, last week we spent quite a bit of time, or we spent the entire week, obviously focusing on achievement goal theory, which really again speaks to the central kind of component or characteristic or importance of goals in informing students' motivation. And then we've also talked throughout the course about how deeply intertwined motivation and affect or emotion are. And so the bottom line here from this third column within the SEVT framework is that students' experiences, their perception of those experiences, and students' experiences, their contextual considerations, what they bring to the table, their perception of all of those things, all of those are really important, and then helping students or shaping students' beliefs and focus on certain goals and also effective reactions and memories. So that's kind of the bottom line of the third column, that critical antecedents as well to motivational beliefs are goals and general kind of schemas that they develop, and then also emotion, or in other words, effective reactions to certain interpretations. Now, we've finally reached the final column of this SEVT visual depiction of the model. And this final column is, I don't want to say particularly important, but really important because it includes the major motivation constructs, or in other words, major motivational beliefs embedded within this model. Specifically, the competence belief, or the can I do this construct, that's reflected in this model are what's referred to as students' expectations of success. Sometimes it's also referred to as expectancy for success as well. Second is the why do I want to do this construct? In other words, students' reasons for engagement or a lack of engagement. And what that motivation construct maps onto in this model is students' subjective task values. And what this theory proposes is that all of these previous considerations that I just mentioned are really important in directly and indirectly shaping students' motivational beliefs, which again are reflected here in expectancies and task values. And second of all, in turn, these motivational beliefs are powerful predictors of how well students ultimately end up performing and the subsequent choices that they make. as you would probably gather, the higher students' expectancies for success. So the more they would endorse that, can I do this question? And the more they value in a positive way the academic domain or task, the higher the performance and the more they're going to continue to choose to continue engaging in and pursuing that academic domain, whatever it might be. So let me break down these motivation constructs in just a little bit more depth. When I talk about expectancy for success, again, it's that can I do this construct? And it's specifically defined as how well a student expects to perform on similar tasks in the future. It's highly similar, as you're probably already thinking, to another construct that we've explored so far, namely self-efficacy. Both are very similar in the sense that they reflect domain or task-specific competence beliefs, how confident a student feels that they can be successful. There are slight differences that, for example, with an expectancy for success, it's more focused on what a student thinks that they'll be able to do in the future on future similar tasks. But what's important for you to kind of know and understand is that they're both reflections of that can I do this question, and they're highly similar. And actually, anyway, I won't even get into that, but they're highly similar. Next is task value, which, as the label of the construct kind of pretty strongly implies, task value refers to the extent to which an individual perceives a certain amount of value on a given task. That's pretty broad. Task value is actually reflected in at least 4 different dimensions. Specifically, the first 3 of these dimensions that I'm going to talk about in this recording are intrinsic, attainment, and utility value. When we talk about intrinsic value, that is very closely related to another construct we've talked a little bit about so far in this class, and that's intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic value refers to how much inherent enjoyment a student associates with a given academic task. So if a student really inherently enjoys engaging in that task, that means that they're probably going to strongly endorse or have high levels of intrinsic value. With regard to attainment value, this is a construct that is very closely related to a student's identity. In other words, what is the personal importance that a student associates with a given academic domain or task? If a student sees math, let's say, and being really good at math as being really personally important to them and to kind of how they self-identify, that means that they probably have very high levels of attainment value. They don't see it as being personally important at all. If they don't care at all how good or bad they are at math, doesn't really have any bearing on how they see themselves, that means that they probably have pretty low attainment value. Finally, the third of the 4 task value constructs is referred to as utility value. Utility value refers to the perceived usefulness of a given academic task or domain. So, for example, if I am taking a course in, let's take this course, 5183. Let's say that you're planning to do your dissertation research on motivation. Given the emphasis of motivation in this course, what I would hope, especially if I'm doing my job the way that I should be, is that because this course content is so useful to what you want to be doing, let's say in your dissertation research, that would indicate that you would have very high utility value when it comes to your perceptions of this course. So those are the 3 of the 4 why do I want to do this task values that are embedded within an expectancy value perspective. All of these map onto positive motivational beliefs. In other words, why do I want to do this rather than why do I not want to do this? And in more recent years, researchers have really devoted a lot more attention to the 4th task value, which is actually a negatively valenced task value that's referred to as cost perceptions. In other words, what do students feel like they have to sacrifice in order to engage in a given task? Going back here, ignore this first point that I have here. I'm going to return to it in a second, but going back here to our theoretical model, what we would propose based on the SEVT tenets is that the higher students' expectancies for success are, and the highest their intrinsic, sometimes it's also referred to as interest value, the higher their intrinsic attainment and utility value are, the better they're going to perform and the more they're going to continue engaging in a given academic domain. However, the higher students' cost perceptions, the lower, according to this model, the worse they're going to perform and the more they're going to choose to disengage from a given academic domain. So cost perceptions really map onto the negatively valence construct within this model. Specifically, how much do students feel like they have to sacrifice in order to engage in a given academic task or domain? If they feel like they have to give up too much, they're going to be less likely to continue pursuing it in the future. Okay, so now some key SEVT tenets. Specifically, so let me back up a second and say, I promise, I told you that as soon as I said this is probably going to be more polished because I've already tried to record this once, I knew I was jinxing myself, and there we go. But anyway, backing up for a second before I get into the first tenet, again, this kind of gets back to my goal of wanting you to have a general understanding of the model and knowing that there's a lot of complexity embedded within this model. So in addition to understanding the different kind of bottom lines of the columns that we went through, and in addition to understanding those key constructs and just sort of generally how to define and think of them, here are some key tenets and characteristics that I want you to keep in mind to help kind of ground your understanding and application of this model. First, motivational beliefs are highly situated and contextual. In other words, they don't exist within a vacuum. When I say they don't exist within a vacuum, what I mean is that there is so much at play in the student's environment and in their prior experiences and in their interpretation of those experiences that shape their competence beliefs and their reasons for engagement, and ultimately what they choose to continue pursuing and how well they perform in the future. So they're highly situated and contextual. This is something that we've talked quite a bit about and is reflected in a lot, if not all, of the theoretical models that we'll be talking about this semester, at least when it comes to motivation. Second, another important tenet and characteristic of this model and what's theorized is that, importantly, these theorized relations here, despite the visual depiction of them, they are not unidirectional. What I mean by that is illustrated by a quote by Eccles and Wigfield that I absolutely love, that says that today's choices and performances become tomorrow's past experiences. Put it another way, even though I don't want to put it in another way, because I think that that's such a compelling and eloquent expression of this model. Put in another way, although the visual depiction suggests that, cultural milieu influences perceptions, influences goals, influences expectations of success, for instance, this implies a certain level of unidirectionality, whereas what this model is actually proposing is that these pathways and these relations are very much not only bidirectional, but highly dynamic in nature, all influencing each other. So yes, despite what the visual depiction may inadvertently indicate, these theorized relations are not unidirectional. For example, these achievement-related choices and performance then, as Doctors Eccles and Wigfield mentioned, become tomorrow's previous experiences. The third tenet that I really want you to keep in mind is that, to be somewhat redundant with what I've already said, is that the prior experiences, the social identities that students bring to the table, and their interpretation of them all really matter for the motivational beliefs that a student ends up bringing to the table. So again, this is kind of redundant with the first tenet, but kind of, I think, a helpful elaboration of it, that these do not exist within a vacuum, and prior experiences, identities, context, they all play such an important role in what a student's motivational belief looks like and what's brought to the table. And then finally, Another important bottom line that I want you to take away from this model that is not only central to the theoretical model, but has also been established through a lot of empirical research, is that these two motivation constructs, expectancies for success and subjective task value, they have been shown to be really powerful predictors of how well students end up performing, and then ultimately what they choose to continue pursuing or to not continue pursuing in the future. Okay, so now in, I think, a separate recording, I'm going to give a few key summary points and take-home messages from Beamer et al. So I'm going to end this recording here, but I hope that that was a helpful overview of SEVT. And as usual, I can't wait to pick your brains and to hear more about what you thought in class. So thanks as always for listening.